Final hour of At the Round Table with Mamleo. We are moving here. It's funny. You're listening to At the Round Table with Mamleo. I'm your host, Larry Ellison. The doctor is off today. Dr. Bradley is a little under the weather today. The doctor is getting a checkup, literally from the neck up this morning himself. So we wish him well, send him our prayers and our thoughts this morning. He was able to call in for a few minutes, so we thank him for doing so. He's a real trooper. So we appreciate that. Get well, my brother. We love you here. Also, a lot going on this morning. You want to thank our previous guest, Shamika Hoyt, for calling in and our callers as well. We're going to continue to discuss what's happening here in the world and hopefully make an impact there. I want to thank our callers and our new caller that called in this morning as well. Appreciate that. But also, we want to thank our sponsor, Guaranteed Rate Mortgage Company. For all your mortgage needs, give branch manager Cora Holbrook a call at area code 781-342-0252. Guaranteed Mortgage is located at 75 State Street in downtown Boston, Mass. Guaranteed Rate Mortgage Company, guaranteed to exceed your expectations. Like I said, folks, it's going to be hot this weekend. I think the forecast is somewhere in the 90s and humid today and tomorrow. You know, folks want to cool off. Folks usually in the heat. Folks have short tempers. I know, like I said, you know, last weekend, I believe it was, there were some issues with some of our youth out at some of the beaches there, Revere Beach in particular. I can tell folks now, if you're planning to go out there now, the state police are increasing their visibility there. They have put some restrictions on parking, other things like that. Unfortunately, it doesn't sound like it's going to be a place that you really want to be as hot as it's going to be, you know, based on the problem. So hopefully, folks, if you are going, just go enjoy the beach, enjoy the water. Enjoy being around people, but do it responsibly. You know, if you're going there looking for trouble, trust me, it will find you. So, you know, a public service advisory to you is to go there and enjoy it, like I said, and be safe because, you know, there's too much going on in the world here. We don't need to. I mean, if we can't go and enjoy a warm day at the beach, we're really in trouble. With that said, we're going to continue discussing this incident down in Buffalo, New York there, you know, at the Tops supermarket there, those tragic murders of this individual. Like I said, I watch my words intentionally because I don't want to give value to what people think that they're superior than others by even describing them in such a way. They're murderers and they should be called as such, and that's what it is. I'll describe the murderer who murdered these people for doing what a lot of us take for granted, going to the grocery store, going out and running errands. That could have been any of us going to a store. And unfortunately, because we've seen too many times, we probably haven't seen the last of it with the way things are heading in this country with polls, thinking that there's a replacement going on with people of color and that they feel that they're under threat. And we have a lot of our folks in the public, but as well as our elected officials who are perpetuating this lie that there's some replacement going on of a particular race. And folks need to bear arms and go out there and try to stop this. But it was interesting. On yesterday, there was an interview with former city councilor Tito Jackson and one of the reporters from the Boston Globe talking about this issue, and I just thought it was very fascinating. It was on Radio Boston there, and so we're going to play that for you, and Pastor Howe has the cues up, listen to it, and then we're going to talk about it on the other side.
This is Radio Boston. I'm Tiziana Deering. It's Friday, which means we take some time to dive deeper beneath the headlines of the big story of the week. And this week, it was tragic.
It started around 2:30 Saturday afternoon in the parking lot of this Tops Friendly Market store in a predominantly black neighborhood in Buffalo.
Next thing you know, you just kept hearing boom, 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 and you hear them coming inside the store, and all we could do was just drop to the ground.
As more details emerged, it became clear the attack was not random, but thoroughly planned and motivated by hate.
Just before heading to the market, he's believed to have written and posted a 180-page statement, proudly labeling himself a white supremacist and outlining the attack.
Understandably, the community is still reeling.
People just wake up and come kill us whenever they feel like it, and that's not okay.
Sound there from NBC News and CNN. President Biden tried to deliver some hope while speaking in Buffalo on Tuesday.
In America, evil will not win, I promise you. Hate will not prevail. white supremacy will not have the last word.
Here in Boston, emotions hit hard. Here's how Reverend Willie Bodrick II, senior pastor at the 12th Baptist Church, talked about the tragedy with his congregation.
As I told them Sunday, we're grappling with our faith and our frustrations. How do you manage those moments? How do you deal with those times? How do you process the trauma, whether near or far? How do you grapple with the fact that we no longer have safe spaces?
How do you do that? And how do you do it here in our greater Boston community? Here to help us grapple with that, two folks who've been a part of life in Boston for a long time and know our community well. Tito Jackson is a former Boston City Councilor, CEO and founder of Apex Noir Cannabis, and as of yesterday, one of the inaugural members of the new Boston Commission on Black Men and Boys. Tito, thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
And Joan Vanacki, assistant editor and columnist for the Boston Globe. Joan wrote a piece this week with the headline, "How Many White Americans Will Do Anything More Than Shake Their Heads About the Buffalo Massacre." Joan, thanks for coming in as well.
Thanks for asking me.
I appreciate it. So I want to start with the where were you question. Tito, where were you and what were you thinking when you first heard the news?
Just with my nephew. This phrase, "this is not who we are," is the antithesis of what is happening. This is who we are as a country. This actually happened multiple times. It's also frustrating to me that the descriptions of white assailants are usually to give their background and how nice or quiet they were in school, and whether or not people picked on them or not. It pissed me off. It just made me very, very angry. As a black person in this country, the things that actually continue to happen to us in our communities, in particular in this case, where this is targeted, this individual knew the demographic data in order to drive across the country, live stream this. And the first pieces people begin to talk about are his mental health. And I guess the last piece is he was unharmed, unblemished. And you had a police officer who had his arm on his kind of right shoulder. And I just think about the number of black folk who've been shot in the back in traffic stops. Breonna Taylor, who was sleeping. And just the number of black folks who die time and time again at the hands of police, and this individual who killed 10 people literally had not a blemish on him.
Tito, I want to underscore what you're saying before I come to you, Joan. Reverend Bodrick was in on Wednesday. He was here for a leadership conversation. We're doing a series called Stepping Up, where we're talking about people who make change in their community. But we started in this place, and I asked him the question about what he was thinking and feeling on Saturday, and I want to play that.
To be very honest with you, I was very angry this weekend, frustrated, but also angered, because we've seen the signs of this type of white supremacist violence and ideology not only be perpetuated, but end up with lives lost. And if you put it in the grander context of American history, this isn't a new thing. It's just new in its form here in our particular context.
So, Joan, it was really striking to me to then read your piece on what I might call the Great White American Shrug. So I want to ask you where you were when you heard the news and what made you decide to, you can write about anything.
Right. I had spent the afternoon helping my son. I was doing some babysitting for him, and because he's working on a house in New Hampshire. I saw it on Twitter first, and when I got home, I did what I would normally do. I turned on CNN, and I happened to tune in just when they were doing the press conference with the usual lineup of officials talking about what had happened and responding to questions from the press. And I felt, my first reaction was that this was disgusting and disturbing, and it felt like a kick in the gut. But my second instinct was to turn it off. That I felt like I had seen this, heard this before, and I knew exactly the script that was going to follow. I knew exactly what the officials were going to say. I knew exactly what was going to happen, what Tito described, who the assailant was, the background, the story about how he got the gun. I knew what the talking heads were going to say. And I sort of stood there and said to myself, I'm not going to write about it. Because my deadline is Monday morning, I usually spend a part of the weekend trying to figure out what I'm going to write about. And I just thought, I'm not going to write about it because there's nothing more that I could say. And I often feel now that I'm not the right person to say it anyway. That changed as the weekend went on. I started to feel, why am I avoiding this? Why don't I want to think about it? And maybe I should just sort of write about my own reaction. And what really made me write about it was the piece in the New York Times where I saw this bishop from Buffalo who sort of exhorted his fellow religious leaders and said, if you don't stand up and say something, you're not my friend. We need you to speak out about it. And I thought he was letting the rest of us off the hook in a way, and that I would try to write about it, and that in a way I was kind of tracking my own reaction. Maybe the headline should have been Memo to Myself, or maybe Tito would have put the headline White People Problems. I don't know, but I decided to give it a try.
So Tito, I'm just, people can't see the connection, the eye contact between the two of you, the way you were physically reacting while Joan was speaking. So I'm just going to let you jump in.
I want to thank Joan for using her big voice, and she is one of the most prolific columnists that we have in the city of Boston. But I reflect on, and we're at BU right now, I reflect on one of the graduates here, MLK, and he said, in the end, we will not remember the words of our enemy, but the silence of our friends. In the end, we will not remember the words of our enemy, but the silence of our friends. We have to, and I implore you, as white folks, to step up and have these conversations. I am not in at your Thanksgiving table, your birthday party, and someone as amazingly inspirational as Willie Broderick is not there on a regular basis. These conversations, this young man, had he been Muslim, we would have asked, what cell did he come from? Where was he radicalized? Right? Well, this is a young white gentleman who, in this case, came from someplace. He came from a family, he came from a community, and the like. And so we have to really begin to think about 3 out of 4 of the domestic terrorist acts come from right-wing extremists. We need to look at this in historic context. This is the worst massacre since Tulsa, Oklahoma, of black folk in the United States. And I saw...
Just for listeners, the Tulsa Race Massacre of Black Wall Street in Tulsa in the early 1900s. Yep. Go ahead. Sorry.
And I saw a gentleman, Rahsaan Ray, from the Brookings Institute, and he said that, hate groups need to be classified as gangs to allow them to be investigated. And we need to take all of this into account. Lastly, Sandy Hook, I think about this and juxtapose.
School shooting.
Sandy Hook school shooting, 28 people were killed, but 20 white babies who were 6 and 7 years old were killed, and nothing was done. So as a black person, when I look at black folk, and you see there was a video where he skipped over a white person, it really begs the question who we are, where we are, and how do we get out of this? And I would submit it is going to require white folks to step up and have very uncomfortable conversations and do what Joan did, not turn it off, but switch it on to have the conversations with people you disagree with and you have difficulties with.
So
we have to.
Joan, I'm going to come to you just to clarify a couple of things. The shooter wore some kind of a GoPro-style camera and was broadcasting on Twitch until it was quickly brought down. He shot 13 people. 11 of them were black. 10 died. Just for our listeners who may not know that whole picture. Joan, you wanted to jump right in. Go ahead.
Well, what I wanted to respond to was speaking out. Yes, I think it's important, and I'm not going to try to speak for all white people here, but I feel there is a fear now of saying the wrong thing. And Tito, you sort of went down the list of what the wrong thing is. And I know it. Don't call him a teenager, because a black 18-year-old would be called a black man, not a black teenager. Don't call him troubled, because a black 18-year-old who's involved in violence, white people don't see it as troubled. They see it as something different.
As violent.
I know, right. I know the code words, but I think that if you make people afraid of saying anything, then that's an incentive to say nothing. I also think that it's important to try to understand how troubled teenager internet leads to white supremacy. Maybe that's naive on my part that I don't get it. Maybe it's Pollyanna-ish of me to think that trying to understand it can somehow head it off or change it. But, I mean, that's kind of where I'm coming from in my sometimes reticence now to tackle a topic. I started out by saying I've started to feel maybe I'm not the right person to do it because I'm a white woman of a certain age and background. And maybe I shouldn't be discouraged from taking it on. The way to have change is to build coalitions, and that's what makes change happen.
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts there, and I'm going to bring it back to you, Tito. First, it does particularly strike me that white women of a certain age, and I'm entering that age myself, have a very specific conversation we should have here in this moment. And we can talk about the history of white women and Black America and the roles we have and haven't played, but I think it behooves us to sit in the discomfort the way you did with the column. I got a text from a really close friend on Monday saying, what are you going to do about this story? Not, are you covering it? But what are you going to do about this story? And of course, my first reaction was, we're Radio Boston. We stay very local. We're working very hard to be about our community. And then I realized our community needs to have this conversation. Our team realized that, which is why we are trying right here at this table to model a Boston conversation about something that happened in Buffalo. And that feels like sitting with that discomfort, especially white people who I think are not necessarily good at talking about race or versed in talking about race. It's time to take on that mantle of discomfort. And I know I'm opinionating more than I probably should, but this is us at our table together, Tito.
White supremacy is real. When you listen to replacement theory, you need to really listen to what folk are saying. And when you listen to what replacement theory is, which is saying basically all these brown folks are going to take over our country, to me, it's even deeper than that, because I actually look at it as genetic. When you listen to people from the Klan, they're talking about essentially white genetic annihilation based on the fact that there's quote unquote race mixing, right? As well as the number of people of color that are being born. So it's
and just to note, there's history in the 20th century of those kinds of arguments. You're not pulling this out of nowhere. No, there's history there,
right? And so we are reverting back to, and we've heard folks, particularly on Fox News, really push these conversations. And so what I would say is, it is absolutely critical at this time. As a country, that we have these conversations. I also feel like, and when we listen to, really the attack on women with Roe v. Wade, but understand some of the premise of Roe v. Wade is the 14th Amendment, right? And that connectivity. And as a man, I have to step up and say that I believe it is right for a woman to have the right to choose. And that's how change happens. If white folks stand aside, and if someone as powerful as Joan Venaki does not write and use what she's able to do and the ink that she's able to purvey in this, then we cannot and will not move forward as a country. And the question is, are we going to move forward, or are we going to revert backward? And I would submit to you right now, a lot of the conversations that I'm having are conversations that are pulling us back rather than forward. When I see a 9-year-old kid with a video going to a black kid's door with a whip and whipping, there was a story, I believe this is in Texas, where there was a 9-year-old who went to their neighbor's house with a whip and was whipping the door of the home of a black child. These young people come from someplace. These are cultural cues, and they are being raised in this fashion. And so we have to have these conversations. We are in a country where people are trying to change textbooks, and to really push a specific mantra onto our children when it comes to social studies and history. We have to continue to have these conversations, and they result in outcomes such as Buffalo.
So, Joan, with Tito's words still ringing in our ears, one of the things that strikes me about your work over time is that you're good at saying, here's who needs to step up and how. As you think about, after writing this piece and with the feedback you've gotten this week, are there individuals, institutions that have a particular opportunity or a particular responsibility to step forward here in Greater Boston in this moment, facilitate these conversations, participate in these conversations, create spaces for discomfort and stand in it? Have you thought about that?
I actually haven't thought about it from the Boston piece. I've thought about it, I guess, from more of a national platform. I mean, Tito mentioned Martin Luther King. I keep on listening for some voice. There are powerful local voices, of course. You know, Tito is one of them. There are many. I'm listening for a voice on the national front that can get people from both sides to pay attention. I mean, that is the problem right now, right? I think conversations are great. We should have them. They're uncomfortable. They're painful. But we need to have them. But how do you get from the conversation to change? In 2008, which now seems like another century, I thought Barack Obama was that voice for the country. People in a moment in time listened to him. He got people from blue states, red states, to somehow believe they were purple states. We definitely are way past that, and I don't think he's the voice who could do it anymore. He did what he could. But so who is the next person? I don't know. I almost feel like it has to come from the so-called other side.
Tina?
I would submit, and what I say to folks when it comes to running for elected office, if you don't see someone who represents the perspective that you feel or need, you need to run for office yourself. And I would submit that it is problematic, actually, to look for a MLK or a Gandhi. They're gone and they're dead. And typically, we look for those individuals. And our young people, I think, have done a better thing where it's broad-based. And we have to look at it not from the perspective of a leader, but leaders and a movement that changes things. When we look at the Arab Spring, they didn't have any one individual leader that toppled many of these countries. So what I would say to you is that this is not Democrat and Republican. This is white supremacy and those who stand idly by, either who step forward and fight it, or those who stand idly by and acquiesce and are apathetic when it comes to it. And I would submit we have to have white leadership who gets off the bystander list and to step forward and have these conversations in coalition with people of color. We can't. This hurts. This is stressful this week. Seeing black bodies harmed does me physically harm. I've been calling my massage therapist all week, and that is something that we as black folk also deal with. We're looked at oftentimes for leadership, in these situations. We're tired. We're stressed out. And this is a huge burden to bear, to see those bodies of us, a reflection of us on the ground, and then only to also have others not take up their proverbial cross and to do the work that needs to be done. So we should be looking within and not outside of ourselves to be the agents of change.
I hear you, and I guess I have two reactions. I mean, I don't go to a grocery store and think that somebody is going to hunt me down and kill me. So to grapple with what you're grappling with is outside my life experience. Historically in this country, there was a movement, the civil rights movement of the 60s, which I think did what you're talking about, mobilized Black and white Americans towards a goal. And we don't want to, it does feel like someone's trying to turn the clock back. So how do we stop them? I wish I was smart enough to know the answer to that question, but I don't. I'm not.
I think I'm going to leave it there. And I appreciate both of you being at the table today to begin.
All right. Here we are, folks. You know, that interview, Tito Jackson and Joan Venaki on Radio Boston this week. You know, Tito knocked it out the park. And Joan did a great job as well, you know, just really breaking this down, this Buffalo shootings, how it's impacting. And what struck me as well was what Joan Venaki said. You know, she knew the script, that this has become so commonplace that it's looked at as a script. And that nothing is going to change, unfortunately. Nothing's going to come out of this. I mean, they spoke very well, but the problem exists. It's real, and it's not going away. You're listening to At the Round Table with Manlio, 617-282-0685, 617-282-0685. Good morning, caller. Welcome to the Round Table. Thank you for being patient there.
Good morning. This is Jamal Crawford calling.
Hey, good morning, Brother Jamal. How are you, sir?
I'm good, but that just set me off. That triggered.
Well, and it should, Jamal. It should trigger all of us.
Yeah, but probably for different reasons.
Okay.
You know, I might need to call my massage therapist.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. So one of the problems, at least as I see it, is when these conversations do come up, you know, it's almost like what happens on the internet now with the kids. And as you understand, this is an officer dealing with a lot of these kids and stuff. You understand? So there's a lot of kids who are not tough. But boy, on that internet, you would think they are Al Capone.
Right.
Okay. And a lot of times, too, that gets them in trouble because, you know, the old saying, they let their mouth write a check that they behind can't cash.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And see, unfortunately, to me, I'm using that as an example to what happens also in activism, organizing, whatever you want to call it, the movement. So all of a sudden, a tragedy like this happens, and we need a voice from the black community. Who from the people can we speak to? And we get Tito Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Tito Jackson is another old saying, wouldn't bust a grape in a fruit fight.
Okay.
Okay? So these folks have never been on the front lines of nothing. The closest you're going to get is actually his association with Monica Cannon Grant. How'd that work out? Because, see, prior to the whole Black Lives Matter thing, all these people was quiet as a church mouse. They found themselves, once they got the safety of numbers, when everybody else was talking about it, then they felt safe to talk about it. Then they did all that, you know, rah-rah, shish, boom, bon, shouting at the sky, protests with the glitter glue sticks and the magic markers and the signs and all that type of stuff, and got us nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
A whole bunch of sloganeering, pandering, and GoFundMe me.
Right. So duly noted. I get where your point and well taken, Jamal. So I guess my question is, like I said, with Joan Venaki, what she says, you know, that this is a script, but also, I get they reach out to who they think because maybe they're not sure of who the leaders are in our community, right? Because there are other folks who sometimes when I hear them, I have the reaction that you have here about this, about Tito, is that, wow, they really don't know who are the people in the community. No, that's what I'm saying. No, that's what I'm saying. Hear me out for a second here. But what I'm saying is that the folks who we elect to, you know, we get these, you know, a press release from them about this and no real substance about this. And to your point, about the young folks with the firearms. You know, we had 2 young people that are arrested. Actually, there was another young man that was arrested yesterday who was a student of BPS with a firearm, right? And so we hear very little from the people who are charged with supposedly to deal with these problems and deal with these issues when they come about. They run, and there's no accountability on their end as well. So then they seek out others who are willing to speak. And they may not be the best person to be the voice for our community. But because folks don't know any better, that's where they go. Your comments, your thoughts?
So, you know, in the Panthers, there's a thing that says no investigation, no right to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning you got to study what you're talking about before you talk about it.
Okay.
So everybody, you know, the Globe calls you up, hey, you want to go and discuss? Yeah, sure. Why? Because of ego and all that type of thing. Even though, you know, never mind the fact that you're not qualified to talk on the issue of never even been involved with a case like that or anything. And that's where it becomes problematic to me. Black leadership, whether it's political, whether it's community leadership or leadership within the church, is problematic. And that's why I want not just Tito, because they also had on there, or kept referencing rather, Pastor Reverend Willie Broderick, who's now, you know, 12 Baptist Church, the church that I came up in. And once again, as a guy who's smart, as a guy who pays attention, like looking at all this stuff, and as a member, or former member, I guess they don't cancel membership, so it's like having my old Blockbuster video card, you know, from 12 Baptist Church. And once again, I'm not being funny here. Nice guy, beautiful family, all that, wonderful. But I don't know what he does. So when people say, you know, we need to talk to people like you that does all this in the community, I don't know what you do besides have a church. Like I don't see these people anywhere. Once again, the closest association that I can see to it is when most of these people clamored around the Black Lives Matter movement and Miss Cannon Grant. And that was an error in both judgment and an exercise in futility because it brought us nothing. So that's really my concern, is that when these discussions are had and framed as if people are speaking for black people, or the fact that the Globe is supposed to be like the moral compass of the city, I also don't like that. You know, the Globe, I think, just now has been sprucing up hiring, and, you know, we seeing the display on this very radio station with Boston Black News, but the Globe got like, what, 10 black people that work there? And they're the moral authority on race and blah, blah, blah. So I just think we need to kind of refocus and shift the conversations. In fact, you know, I think we need to have some very in-depth discussions on this very station about race and about leadership and these things, and like kind of have like a town hall summit and bring it all together, bring a panel of folks to really discuss this, because it's not helpful.
Would you say, Jamal, that there's a vacuum of leadership in the community? Because before, we kind of knew who those individuals were that, you know, and we didn't really have a problem because we felt like they had our best interests at heart, right? Not saying it was always perfect, but you go back to the Bill Owenses and the Billy Celestes. I'm going to use him for someone who I felt very comfortable when he was speaking on issues as it related to law enforcement. And I'm like you, I stay in my lane. If that's not an area where I have any expertise or knowledge, I'm not going to take the invitation just because it's offered. But there seemed like, I don't know if you heard our guest earlier in the 8 o'clock hour, Shamika Hoyt, there seems to be such a vacuum in this city of leadership in our communities. And we alluded to, I don't know if you, because staying with the Globe there, we talked about the $8 figure that Shattered Boston gets an update. And, you know, it just says that, okay, when they came out with the $8 net worth of black families compared to $247,000 for white families, and that they've convened a study. They're still short $250,000 to get that study going, but it's just going to take 3 years to get an initial study on that. And the reason why I bring that up and tie that in with this, because I'm like, wait a minute, why aren't our leaders saying 3 more years to study what we already know? And we're seeing what's happening in this country, what's happening in Buffalo, and unfortunately we'll see it again. There doesn't seem to be a cohesive message or plan to get us out of this situation in this country, and even in this city, in this state.
Well, if folks who, probably, our age might remember back on Saturday Night Live with, the great comedian Billy Crystal was on there. He used to do a character called Fernando.
Yep, I remember that.
Okay. And so our problem with a lot of our elected officials and leadership up here is that they fell into his mantra. It is better to look good than to feel good.
Okay.
Okay. So that just means as long as we keeping up the appearances, see, because like that $8 thing, let's say you're really worth $8, but you got on a pair of $150 Jordans, you got on your little shirt, you're down at Slade's, and so you look like $1 million, but you're really $8.
Right.
And see, with our leadership in the city, once again, you can't expect people to do what they haven't done before. So most of these people who have not run businesses, or at least successful ones, they have not really, the reason that we know them and consider them leaders is because they ran for office, and by the roll of the dice, they won. But other than that, in very rare cases, is there anything else that they've achieved in it? Like them winning office is the achievement. It wasn't like these other things. Right now, crazy man. Dr. Oz is running. Okay, so whatever you think about it, but see, he was Dr. Oz before he was running for this. He was already Dr. Oz. So if he loses or whatever happens, he goes back to being Dr. Oz.
Right.
We don't have people here, in my belief, that have really had any kind of organization or mass behind them, and these days are old. And why? To me, is there a leadership vacuum? And a lot of these guys are aging out. People would still be calling Mel King for their doggone problems. Let that man chill out.
Right, but let me jump in there for a second, Jamal, because to that point, when we do find people like that, like you've run, Darren Howell has run, Priscilla, I'm saying for folks who have been out in there, who are at least attempting to try to make a difference, they don't seem to get traction or support, right? We tend to support what we know a lot of times maybe name recognition or some endorsement from somebody else who isn't connected with our community, and those folks normally come out on top. I mean,
it's really the bourgeoisie versus the black masses. Right. This is how it has always been.
But then who do we blame for that? Because we go along with it.
Well, because folks are not politically educated and politically savvy. So oftentimes, as we know, we vote against our own best interests, right? And because we're so caught up in ego and vanity and looks and appearances and all the shallow, superficial stuff, that's how we get caught up. Once again, better to look good than to feel good.
Yeah.
So in that mindset, folks don't really put much stock in the things that matter the most, character and, results and all that. They're looking at the flash in the pan. Oh, I like that person. Oh, they look good, or whatever it is. And this is why we get what we get. And also, too, combined with, we were talking about the other day, I believe, the dumbing down of America. And to your point, what you said earlier, when white America has a cold, black America has pneumonia.
Yeah.
So if there was a dumbing down in America, then that means we went through a mass stupefaction, right? And because of this, at the same time when entertainment level distractions came in, right? Because see, in the 50s and the 60s, kids didn't have Xbox or whatever.
Right.
We might not have had the doggone, bus boycott or whatever if there was Xbox back in the day, right? People were focused on things that were more important. But now we've all become more into this pursuit of trivia, right? Where now all the little things, the Facebook, the selfies, the this and the that, the galas, the black tie affairs, and now people are caught up into that more than actual results or actual research and study. So for instance,
go ahead, finish.
I was just going to say, for instance, just to kind of harp on that point. So when a guy like former Councilor Tito Jackson is talking about white supremacist groups in Boston, great. Have you studied that? Because, see, me, as the former National Minister of Information for the New Black Panther Party, that was my charge. And I'm one of the first people that actually alerted the BPD back then when they were so busy trying to investigate me and the Black Panthers because they were scared. And I was like, do you understand that right now, between Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont, and Maine is the largest growing hotbed for white supremacist activity? They've been buying land out there for decades and all that. I told it, people said I was crazy. Then, if you remember, we had the big incident of the neo-Nazi skinhead who attacked 3 young black Cape Verdean girls in downtown Crossing, and he just happened to be the son of who? Spalding. Josiah Spalding III, the son of Josiah Spalding, who to this day is the director of the Wang Center. So I don't know about these people, but I know that when we was fighting against them neo-Nazis, they was nowhere to be found. And when I was doing all that investigation and studying and pushing law enforcement and whatnot, and I'll end on this. At one point, the FBI memorandum said that the biggest threat to national security was the Islamification of black men. Whether in jail or whether you became a Sunni or Orthodox Muslim or you became a Nation of Islam Farrakhan. They said that their number one concern for the internal threat for America was the Islamification of black men. That changed some years ago, probably about 10, 15 years ago. And that changed, and now the number one, recognized by the FBI, the number one threat to internal security in the United States is white nationalists and white supremacy groups.
Right.
So folks ain't been paying attention.
Well, that's true. That's what I'm saying. Stay woke, as we used to be our brand here. So, Jamal, a couple of questions here. I'll follow up with what you're saying. One is, how do we move out of this, and can we move away from this? Because you're right. The January 6th insurrection was a perfect display of white supremacy and showing that how certain populations, including a lot of elected officials, law enforcement, even some from here, were able to conduct themselves in a manner that we wouldn't even be able to get to the front steps. I would not have my job if I acted like some of my colleagues or they had just my presence there would have been enough to get me sidelined from being able to act in my official capacity. But yet, even the woman that was stormed that, and it took them really being backed up against the wall before they had unfortunately used some deadly force in that outcome. But we know that if Jamal and Larry had even stepped on the steps with the appearance of trying to, we wouldn't have made it another step further. That there's a privilege, and even in this instance, someone sent me a display of different white males who were committing crimes such as the one last Saturday, and it was striking because beside them were black people, like you said, who were shot for no reason other than really being black, or what happened to George Floyd and Tayana. So I'm saying is that he was able to surrender, even though he was threatening to commit suicide. He was able to survive and at least have his day in court, where we don't usually get that opportunity.
Absolutely not. And too, when you look at the stories, because I saw some people trying to do the conspiracy thing, and then some people come back and then they name some black people who have, got into custody and nothing happened to them, and So there's going to be a statistic for everything. But what we do know is that primarily when it comes to these, mass shootings, the major perpetrator of that tends to be young to middle-aged or older white male. Mm-hmm. Generally who has some sense of frustration, whether it's the loss of a job, whether it's a bad marriage, whether it's racial things, animus, or what have you. But that is generally the age group of concern, and
right.
And much like criminologists do with profiling,
right.
And I'm not talking about racial profiling. I'm talking about psychological profiling and all the stuff that they really do to profile criminals. We have to acknowledge that all these years we've been taking the rap, the angry black man. No, the real thing is the angry white man.
Right, and I think Timothy McVeigh was another example of that, right? And we're seeing it even more when he bombed the Murrah building, right? And we're seeing more of that today because these folks think they're going to be lauded as heroes, because when you have a former president telling folks, if you don't take back your government, if you don't take back, make America great again, which we know what that is code for, these folks there are a lot of folks who buy into this because they've been waiting for someone to, and now we're seeing in state legislators around the country, enacting laws to reinforce this, that this is that there is a fight for the, like I said, replacement theory. So they're legitimizing this type of behavior, and you have the courts be in line with people who are in lockstep with it, saying, hey, there's nothing wrong with this. This is your right. This is your God-given right to behave in this manner.
Well, let's go back for a moment in history, right, to Boston, the busing boycott, right?
Mm-hmm.
The busing boycott, not the busing
forced
boycott.
busing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I tried to boycott it. It didn't work.
Right. So of course, people like Ron Bell and others have talked about that, and da-da-da-da. And so if we remember, though, a part that doesn't get discussed as much is that during that time, the Ku Klux Klan came to Boston because they were proud of the people of South Boston and was like, yeah, you go, high five. Okay? And when they came to meet with the people of South Boston to show them some of their trade organizational tactics and, this type of thing, from what I understand of legend is, that there was a meeting at the time in which then Jim Kelly from City Council and Dapper O'Neill, also who became a city councilor, were both made honorary members of the Ku Klux Klan. So what we have to do is understand that, let's not get swept up in like, oh, this is a new phenomenon. I wish it was. It ain't new.
Right. It's
this
just
been going on.
But that's what I'm saying.
With the regular Nazis.
Right.
And now we got new Nazis.
Right. But that's what I'm saying. This is the modern day version of when Trump is saying "Make America Great Again." Those of us who pay attention, like you and I, know exactly what they thought America was great when folks like us were not considered as human beings, when we had very little or nothing at all. It was still waiting for those 40 acres and the mule. I'll just take the 40 acres, as I don't know what I do with a mule at this day and age, right? Because we have cars. But I guess, again, Jamal, my question is, where do we go from here? Because we seem to be so fragmented. Like I was talking to Cliff earlier, is that we're so busy fighting with each other over trivial things and sometimes over dislikes, and I get it, and I'm like you. If I don't have any use for you, I just stay away from you. But this problem is bigger than any differences that we have amongst ourselves, because people are literally dying, being gunned down in supermarkets, and this is not the end of it. And this, you're a history buff like I read about these things, Jamal, and now I feel like I'm living what I thought we would never see again in this country, this type of racial division. And I know it didn't go away, but it's more prevalent now than it was, and people are co-signing it. And people who, just like back in the day when you had George Wallace's, and now you have Marjorie Taylor Greene's and those folks and the Donald Trumps, our elected officials are now sanctioning it. That's where it's, because these are the folks who write the laws. These are the folks who can get these folks behind them. That's more dangerous than just, the David Dukes of the world who had their little following. But now you have someone who was elected president with this mantra of replacement. And you have a network that all they do is promote this type of racism and replacement theory.
Yes, and they are enabled now because, technology now. I mean, back in the day when I was, after these people, they would taking the church route, Ku Klux Klan and all these little neo-Nazi skinhead groups and all this. They were pamphleting people to death. They would be putting pamphlets in the bus stations and this type of thing. But when the internet came up, that's when they were really able to put their organizing, on 100. And the internet, when it started off first, the old chat rooms, and now, they have secret stuff, the dark web. People understand about where he was, 4chan, and there's all these things, 2chan and 4chan and 5chan and all this type of stuff, where there are these like secret rooms where people discuss everything, how to make weapons, how to make drugs, and also too, and how to kill black people, coincidentally. So it really, they have been enabled more and more because the technology is out there. And today's racists, this ain't your granddaddy's racist.
Right.
The KKK with the sheets and horses. Like you said, you wouldn't know what to do with a mule these days. Neither do they. They traded in the horses. They got, Ford F-350s and stuff, and they're heavily armed. They ain't no more shotguns.
But they're also troubling, like I said, they're also our elected officials. There are people who are elected supposedly to represent everyone, but we know that that's not the case. And I feel like if this election in the fall turns out the way that it's forecast, that this is only going to get worse for people that look like us, because half this country is saying they're okay with going back to this, and then there's the other half of us, black, white, brown, who are saying we're just going to idly stand by.
Thank you for your call.
Yeah, I think we're going. We are doomed, and unfortunately, being a spiritual guy, and y'all in the church and everything, the Bible, the Quran, any book of wisdom, any spiritual book, the end is not so nice. It doesn't say at the end, I'd like to teach the world to sing, and we're all gonna have a Coca-Cola. It really talks about disastrous stuff in the end, and I think, as every era has, that we are in those end times.
Yeah.
And if it is going to get worse than this, with the wars and now famine, in Africa and so on and so forth, Putin might flip a switch, or Kim Jong-il might flip a switch. A comet might come out the air, whatever, E.T. might land. We don't know. We are in uncertain times, and the world is going to go topsy-turvy, I believe, before it gets it all together.
So, Jamal, because we got a couple of minutes here, I just want to switch gears for a second. I want to switch because, we're seeing an uptick in young people with guns, where it's a warm weekend, and it's sad to say, right, that we always equate, unfortunately, here in the city, right, that usually that means that the violence is going to probably be heating up as well. We already have the state police out in Revere and in Carson Beach, looking to try to quell problems that have been erupting at those locations and stuff. Any advice for folks out there, not that they're going to take it, but of how we can just get through this without killing each other? And like I said, it concerns me, working in the schools for the police department in this week. What I'm seeing are very troubling signs. I've seen it all year long, but it seems to be ratcheting up at a level where the number of readily available guns to 13 and 17-year-olds, and folks don't seem to be concerned enough about it. That they're taking any real proactive approach to addressing it.
Well, one thing, there was an organizer at one time, we've parted ways. I haven't heard from her in quite some time. But the point that she made was quite excellent, which is, where did the gun come from?
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, I know back when I was a kid, we was getting our guns from down south, Alabama, Atlanta, all this type of stuff, right? But nowadays, you can go right to, Maine. It's an hour and a half away. You know what I mean?
But the ghost guns you can produce with a computer.
On the right. 3D printer or whatever.
Right.
And see, and once again, isn't this crazy? Because do you know the smarts that it takes to be able to produce and assemble a 3D printed gun to follow the instructions? And if our kids are doing that, isn't it a shame that they don't have other opportunities, and that they feel as though that they need weapons or what? It's just it's a layer it's an onion full of layers of pain on top of trauma, and the reasons why we are in this condition that we in. How to get out of it, I don't know. Bigger brains than mine than try to figure it out. I don't know. But this summer, what I will say is, everybody be cool. What I don't do anymore is, I used to be a loudmouth in the streets, like road rage, and somebody cut you off. Hey, buddy, you better get. I don't do that type of stuff anymore. I keep both hands on my steering wheel, and I'm on my business. I drive like an old lady now.
But I get that, and I appreciate it. But I'm just saying, it really concerns me, Jamal, because I don't think that the folks who are charged with supposedly coming up with solutions really have any, and what I'm seeing is that folks are being allowed to, basically left to their own demise. And
the metal detector is a good start. The reinstallation of the metal detector at Charlestown. I'm not one of those people. I know people like, I don't want my kid to go to school with metal detectors. Well, do you want your kid to go to school with guns?
Right.
So
There's very few
I
places
think that there should
public.
be metal detectors.
Right. There's very few public places that you can go into now, and you don't have to go through some type of screening of that nature. But I think just having it in one venue because you had a problem there. Because my approach would be if they're in Charlestown, they're probably in other schools as well.
Well, they're definitely in other schools. And once again, and I've been doing this since we was in school in the
Right.
80s. I
Right.
mean, we have more guns than these kids.
Yeah.
But the thing is, metal detectors, yes, but then, of course, you're going to have to worry about what we did as well is then you're going to have to do perimeter sweeps around the schools because, of course, if I can't bring the gun in school, I can stash it in this trash can or up under this rock or under this car or whatever, you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's crazy. I don't know. Like I said, Jamal, I'm not optimistic. I can tell you that, brother. And usually I try to be upbeat, but what I'm seeing, because I have a front row seat, I just don't see things getting any better. I see them getting worse, and I'm hoping that on Monday I can be proven wrong that the warm weather just didn't bring a tragedy, because I'm already seeing, what's happening, the increase in the violence and the shootings just in the last couple of days in certain neighborhoods.
It's really sad. God bless all those families and people involved. And I really do feel, I wish every one of those kids that gets caught like that, I wish I could get like a couple of hours to talk to these young kids as well.
Well, see, the sad part, Jamal, is that someone like me who's there and gets this, I don't even get an opportunity to try to intervene ahead of time. That's what's really tragic about this as well, because people that actually do care don't. And I'm in a position where I should be able to get access to them before they get to the booking desk, and then it's out of my hands. Final words, Jamal.
Absolutely. We got work to do, brother.
We do. Listen, man, I love you, my brother. I appreciate you. And